So welcome everyone back to the channel. Good to have you with us again. I'm going to get straight into things today without all of the usual scene setting and like, share, subscribe and all that, because of a very special guest on the channel today. Many of you, if not most of you, will, and I hope should recognize him. He's a very dear and old friend of mine. It's kind of like welcome back to Cloud Conversations Reunited, if you're familiar with the channel that we used to do years ago. So a massive welcome to Rue Campbell. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, all good here. Appreciate the invitation. It's good to catch up with you.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's just going to be like having a nice little chat that we just share with the world, and very much like old times, those old days when we used to do Cloud Conversations, which still out there. If you want to go and check it out, the channel's still there. If you want to go and check out some of that old stuff, and hey, we've never officially said we've retired it. It might come back one day. Who knows?
Yep. I guess it depends on the workload. We share a lot of the same kind of followers in own little Microsoft bubble, and I've got a little 7-month-old who's kind of kicking about just now, so that's really eating into my time to do community-based stuff. But I'm trying, and I'm putting some stuff out there, and I guess that's the kind of thing we can talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. It is definitely hard keeping up with that community stuff. And like myself, you are a Microsoft MVP. I think is it 3 times now for you, or 4 times?
Geez,
Not sure.
many times amongst friends. No, I think I'm at 3 times now. But yeah, I've been an MVP in large part thanks to you. It was yourself that nominated me, and that got the ball rolling back in, I want to say 2021. I got nominated. So yeah,
Sounds like that. Yeah,
it's been good.
And the easiest nomination decision I've ever made, and actually my first as well. I think you were the first one I ever did nominate once I got that privilege myself. And no, you've done absolute wonders in the community. You've become a very recognized figure and done some great work, and I want to talk about some of that today, starting with, as I found out recently, you have a wonderful new course on LinkedIn Learning, right? Which is all about Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which I know is close to your heart. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, spot on. So the course is all about deploying and managing Defender for Endpoint on Windows environments. So all the way back from, if you still got them, Windows 7 devices, all the way up to the latest versions of Windows Server. Defender for Endpoint supports all those types of scenarios. And the course is about kind of taking the complex and atypical way that Defender for Endpoint is deployed and managing, and try and just simplify that for folks, because, well, the reality is, when I first started doing Defend for Endpoint going back 4+ years now, it was quite daunting to me to get started, because every different operating system has a different way of deploying it. Every organizational infrastructure and setup has a different way of then managing it. So Intune, Group Policy, Config Manager, all these different scenarios and ways you can manage it. And I just wanted to put something out there that really simplified that for folks. And to be fair, Microsoft are doing a really good job of that at the minute. It is getting simpler to manage, but there's still a few things I find that in my conversations with customers catches folks out. So hopefully the course, which you can get on LinkedIn Learning now, hopefully it just simplifies some of that stuff and lower that kind of barrier for entry into Defender.
Ah, wonderful stuff. And I've looked through the course myself. Before we started recording, I said I've not completed it yet, but I would say I'm about 3/4 of the way through. And Defender, as you'll remember, was never one of my sweet spots. My comfort zone's always been Purview and to some extent Entra. And these days, being in a leadership role, I'm even less in the weeds than I used to be. So one of the reasons I do this channel, when people ask me why I do this, is to try and keep my knowledge fresh, because it's really not fresh day to day. But in looking through the course, I've gained a great deal from it. I've learned a lot, and I've started to try and apply some of that myself in some recent videos on Defender, specifically for Mac, because you'll remember I'm a Mac person, and I've had some struggles, but getting there bit by bit, a bit at a time. But no, so it's absolutely wonderful.
No, you raise a good point about Mac environments, because Defend for Endpoint is obviously supported on Mac OS. It supports whatever the kind of most recent 3 versions are. That's Microsoft support cycle for it. And it's that type of EDR agent and endpoint protection platform on macOS is a very different beast than it is on Windows, in part because of the level of access that the software developers get to the operating system. And, we're kind of recording this hot off the heels of the CrowdStrike incident. And that really actually highlighted one of the key differences in macOS versus Windows for endpoint protection platforms is the way that kernel access and things is managed is very different. And so when it comes to deploying Defender for Endpoint on macOS, it's not rocket science, but there's a few more hurdles you have to jump through and design considerations and permissions that need to be unlocked and all the rest of it. So you can do it using Intune and make it nice and simple. But certainly if you're kind of, whether it's Defender for Endpoint or whether it's the Purview service, which very, very similar, then, if you're just a standard user getting that into macOS, there's a whole bunch of next, okay, give this permission, give that permission, do this, do that. It's kind of long and complicated, I guess.
Yeah, it is. I found that as I've tried it, and I did just the local script install first, that quick and easy option, which I guess you would do if you were just doing testing as someone like I am. And specifically to get the Purview stuff going, because the new AI Hub feature in Purview, which I'm really excited about, depends on some of the policies that you can activate and the indicators tied to those policies. You need to have devices onboarded to take advantage of that. So you need to be on Defender for Endpoint, which is a little bit cheeky at Microsoft in a way, but I guess I get where they're coming from. It's a clever little play, but that's where I had some problems in that. I just couldn't get the configuration to push to. I still can't. So it's still open for solution, and I'm sure I'll get there eventually. I've got feelers out to various people, other MVPs, and at Microsoft, nobody's quite come up with the answer yet. So we'll see. I might just have to try and duplicate it on another machine. It might just be corrupted on the Mac I've tried, but we'll see. Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, look, this is one of the problems is. When it comes to recreating a lot of errors that are produced by Defender or similar programs, recreating that is quite difficult because everyone's environment is that tiny little bit different, right? So because it's tripping you up doesn't mean it's tripping other folks up. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, you mentioned the AI hub there in Purview. I was actually kicking the tires on that earlier this week, and it's quite a neat little capability, you know what I mean? It can show you all the different generative AI programs that folks are using and what prompts they're sharing and all that kind of stuff. And that's a good example of the intersection of where Defender and Purview meet and why, when it comes to security in general, you can't just look at it as Defender or Purview or this or that. It's like, it is Microsoft 365 in its entirety. That's your solution, not just little individual bits of it, I guess.
Yeah, so true. And I'm going to give you credit for this because I learned this phrase from you. Defense in depth was always one of your things that you've always said, and I've taken that. And I say that to all the customers that I talk to now and drill that into my team where I work at Insight, and I'm sure you're the same where Threatscape for you, as that defense in depth is critical. And so many clients will come to you with, oh, we want to do conditional access, or we want to do Intune or this, and they've just got one piece of the puzzle in mind, and they're not thinking that way. They're not thinking strategically, holistically, and it's so frustrating.
100%. And it's Purview is a really good example of that because folks look to Purview and they think, well, this is the data security software, right? This is the data security platform. But the reality is it's really just part of the whole picture. Because your data security, that's contingent on your identity security and your device security. So if I give you an example, you can apply all the sensitivity labels you want, you can apply all the data lifecycle management you want, all the DLP that you want. But if I have gaps in my MFA, if I have unrestricted BYOD access, if I've got info stealing malware on my clients, none of that stuff really matters, right? So you kind of have to go back to first principles and figure out, okay, well, what is the first line of defense against the adversary? And oftentimes that's maybe the quickest win as well. Get that sorted. And then as part of my maturity model, then I'm going to start looking at DLP and things like that, because those can be very time consuming and almost a little bit distracting compared to what the real risks of your data are, right? I mean, I work with a lot of customers who are at that journey where they're very mature and they're finally ready to start putting a lot of investment into DLP. But then I'll work with customers on the other side of the equation, and they've just got 365 and they're like, okay, well, I want to start labeling stuff. And I'm kind of like, that's a big meaty project where you would, it's definitely worth your time, but maybe just not yet, right? Maybe let's first off iron out all those gaps in your conditional access and make sure your device compliance and your BYOD policies are in place. And then we'll deal with that type of stuff later on to achieve exactly what you said. It's about the defense and depth play, right? So that if an adversary gets me in this area, well, they're going to have to jump over this hoop and that hoop and all the other hoops that I've kind of carefully organized to really just make their life a living hell and raise as much noise as possible. That's the idea anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree with that. But getting back to the course, just briefly to talk a little bit more about that. How did that all come about? And am I right in thinking you've got another course with LinkedIn Learning as well that's available? I'm sure you mentioned that during what I listened to on this one.
Yeah, that's right. So I have another course coming out hopefully in August, as I say, reaching over to kind of look at my calendar as if that's going to help me. My entire computer's frozen other than this call, so we should be good. The other course coming out in August is all about Defender Vulnerability Management. So it really plays nicely in with the Defender for Endpoint course, where it's kind of like after I've got that up and running, what next? And the thing about Defender Vulnerability Management is the deployment side of that. That's if you've deployed Defender for Endpoint, then you're like 95% of the way there for deploying Defender Vulnerability Management, maybe with a few other bits and pieces you can put on the end. Where it really comes in is the operations of it, right? And how do I take this tool and actually use it to minimize the weaknesses in my organization? And one of the things that will probably come through in the course on Defender Vulnerability Management is that it's not a perfect tool. It does have its flaws. But when I look at a lot of my customers and I look at where they're at just now, you turn on Defender Vulnerability Management and it just lights up like a Christmas tree with all sorts of recommendations and tells you weaknesses that you maybe never even knew you had. So for that type of customer that's never had a vulnerability management scanner or kind of security posture management tool, is very, very useful for just all of a sudden giving you tons and tons of work and keeping you very, very busy remediating these types of weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So I look forward to that one coming out then. Definitely, that's going to be great. So how much work's involved in doing a course like this online? I imagine it took you quite a lot of time and effort and commitment and a lot of love poured into that.
Yeah, so I started working on the LinkedIn Learning team with it probably the tail end of last year. Went through the kind of design process of the course, gave them a whole bunch of ideas about what I thought we could do and where there was demand for it. And they were an absolute dream to work with. LinkedIn Learning, if anyone is thinking of doing something like that, I can't recommend them enough. They're just so easy to work with, so helpful. And from there, it was a whole bunch of very early mornings to get stuff done. Because I got a 9 to 5 job where day in, day out, I'm like flat out helping customers and doing consultancy and professional services and things like that. So for the most part, I did the course building, the slides, the recordings. I did those before I would start work. So for example, we, like I said, get 7-month-old. So we welcomed her into the world at the end of December and started the recording in, I want to say about March, something like that, maybe a wee bit earlier than March. And I would just get up at 5 a.m. and then record stuff until 8 a.m. And because I'm such a perfectionist, like one tiny little hiccup, I would just delete it all and start from scratch. So I probably made it more time consuming than it had to be. Hopefully that's reflected in the quality of the course. I'd love any feedback that anyone's got. But yeah, just thrash through it that way.
Yeah, well, I can feedback immediately. I think it's super, super polished and professional. I really enjoy listening to you tell the story and the tone of your voice, and you make it very accessible, very easy to understand. The speed, the cadence, it's all brilliant, mate. So you've got nothing to worry about there. And I think it'll be very, very well received by others in the community who want to learn this. So I applaud you for it, mate. Absolutely well done.
Cool. No, listen, I really appreciate that feedback. And similarly, if anyone's got less positive feedback, I want to hear all of it, because again, this isn't going to be the last time I do this kind of thing, and I want to make sure it's always improving. And it's funny you mention that about the voice and the cadence and all that kind of stuff, because it makes me laugh. Because it's like everyone hates the sound of their own voice, right? And so I've been watching these courses. I'd record the videos and I watch it back and I'm like, oh God, I can't even stand to listen to it. But then I'm reminded of two things that made me laugh once. So one of those was old customer of mine that I used to work for. I joined a meeting once and no one else showed up other than me and one fella. And he said, you know what, Roo, I really like joining meetings with you because your voice just relaxes me so much. And I just burst out laughing, and I'm like, geez, I get like the most bland, normal, and like, because I grew up among Scottish people, so I get the most bland, normal Scottish accent you could ever imagine. And here I am being exotified for the accent. And then we had another piece of feedback recently where we're doing a second edition of the Defender book. So we're going to do Mastering Microsoft Defender XDR. Whole bunch of new chapters, update it for all the changes that Microsoft have introduced into Defender XDR. And we put a questionnaire saying, hey, if you get any ideas, anything you'd want to learn about Defender XDR, let us know, we'll put them in the book. And one of the, if he's watching this, you'll know exactly who he is. One of the feedback pieces from it was, can Roo record the audiobook so I can listen to listen to his voice? And I'm like, geez, I think the last thing anyone needs is an audiobook on Microsoft Defender, because you'd probably get about 5 minutes into it and crash your car from falling asleep or something like that.
Oh, that's such a great compliment, though. And I agree. I think the Scottish accent is very pleasant to listen to, certainly from my perspective, and quite soothing. So I can see where people are coming from. And if you look around, I take a lot of inspiration from a lot of YouTubers, and not necessarily just technical ones. I look to all sorts of genres because I'm big into sci-fi and that sort of thing. And there's this massively followed channel called Critical Drinker. I don't know if you've heard of him, and he sort of critiques TV and film, Star Wars and Star Trek and all that, and takes the mickey out of it basically. And he has an accent very similar to yours, and it's his voice is just great to listen to. So I think that's really true. But funny you should mention that. I've had colleagues and friends say the same about me, which always surprises me. A couple of my colleagues say that they find my voice very soothing, and that's just it really baffles me. It really, really does. And I think I think there's a big difference for me in the world. The way I'm trying to share via the YouTube channel, I think I can get away with a lot more and be a bit less polished, and not have to be as stringent with how I present it so much. I try and keep it a bit more sort of like real. And if I make some mistakes, or I sniff or cough or do one of my Tourette's twitches, then I'll just leave it in. But if you're doing like a professional course like that, it's got to be spot on, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, you raise a really good point. As far as I think that when it comes to kind of long form education, like YouTube deep dives that you do, some of your videos are like going like 30, 40 minutes, and some of your, I think one of your e-discovery videos is really long like that. And similarly, when folks are doing, when you're doing like a kind of in-person event or something like that, I think you can afford to be a bit less polished because it's more real, right? It'd be silly to expect the finalized thing. But the shorter the video, almost the higher the expectations are for the production value, right? Which is, and we live in this world now where the algorithms and the attention span so heavily dominate the way that we have to produce content and videos and all that kind of stuff. That, I mean, I don't know what you're like, but I'm really guilty of it, where I'll be on YouTube on my phone and I'll be on the shorts bit and I'm just scrolling and I give a video like half a second. And if it hasn't caught my attention in half a second, I'm on to the next one, right? So it's funny how that differs from maybe the way that you and I would have learned IT in the past, right? I mean, I think back to when I first started doing IT in you could do college courses and all that kind of stuff, but you also had like these, you could buy DVDs from companies like Train Signal or CBT Nuggets, and they'd come and you'd get like 5 DVDs, and it would be a whole course on Windows Server 2003 or something like that. And I just think it's amazing how different and so much more accessible it is now, right? It's all out there for free on YouTube because of guys like you, compared to back in the day where you had to go out and buy books, you had to buy expensive lab equipment, you had to invest time in DVDs and all that kind of stuff. And I really do think that for folks that are in our industry right now, nothing's perfect, right? But the opportunities to learn and advance your career, and I'm really trying to be open-minded here and consider that I might not be right here, but I do think that it's so much easier now than it has been in the past in terms of that availability to grab information and upskill compared to historic situations anyway.
No, I totally agree. If you want to find something out now, you're straight to YouTube. I think that's my number one source of learning, really, YouTube. You can find whatever I want on there, or on our Copilot is kind of my go-to. Google search or Bing search, if you want to be Microsoft friendly, is barely on it now. Copilot all the way for me. And you'll probably remember I was quite nervous of Copilot and AI at first. I was a little bit, is this going to be the start of? But when I got my head around it and the fact that it's generative, and certainly with the Microsoft flavors of it and the grounding of it within your particular tenant, it's my best friend now. I had to put my hands up and say I was wrong and panicked a bit too early. But yeah, it's but how have you found your use of Copilot? Has it sort of made an impact in your everyday life and your activities?
Yeah, good question. I do use Copilot probably at least every working day now. I use Copilot for Microsoft 365. I think there's still quite a lot of areas where it needs to improve. I'm honestly, I'm a bit less impressed by the generative aspects of it. Like, I think it needs a lot of work when it comes to, if you're in Word and you say, hey, generate me this type of thing. I'm not blown away by that. But what I find extremely useful is the Copilot integration with Teams and the recap feature. Yes. I'm like, shocked at how good that is sometimes at capturing stuff, even like just little flippant comments that I'll say, and then it will go to the back of my mind, and I would never have remembered that, never put it in a meetings minutes if I was doing them manually. And it says, okay, well, here's an action point that you raised. And I'm like, oh yeah, I did say I would do that. You know what I mean? So I find that really, really useful. And even, I think it's just called Microsoft Copilot now, previously called Bing Copilot, right? The non-365 version.
Yeah.
I do still use that quite a lot as well. It's strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of good for generating stuff like KQL queries, or even just thrashing out ideas. Like, I find it quite good for, I'm not the most creative person in the world, so it's reasonably good at coming up with little ideas for stuff. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm going to be doing a YouTube video about this. Give me 10 ideas. You know what I mean? Kind of as a starting point. So it's quite good for stuff like that. And I do use it every day.
Yeah, I've used it for a lot of my YouTube activities, that example you've made being one of them. But one thing that has saved me so much time and thought and energy is I use it to give me ideas for my YouTube titles and the descriptions as well. And at the very least, it gets me started, and I can tweak it a little bit and not rely on it entirely, keep that human, because let's face it, a lot of what it comes back with is a little bit cheesy sometimes, and you would just want to be sticking your own mouth a little bit at some of it.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I'm just looking at my cat here. She's climbing the walls, so I might have to jump off here. No, we're good. The cat fell. She's okay. I do find that and it's not just Bing, it's ChatGPT as well, and Llama, and most of them, right? You can smell them a mile off, right, when something's been generated by it. And they use so many superlatives and stuff like that, right? So everything's amazing or terrific or exciting, or, you know what I mean? And I'm like, just give me in plain, good old, boring, miserable English. You know what I mean? I do find it exaggerates things a little bit, but
it's a good word for it.
Yeah, and it's I probably wouldn't have it any other way though, because I do still find it very, very useful. Like there's even just little things day to day where it's like 2 years ago compared to doing it now, it's like, okay, well, it saves me 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, half an hour there. You know what I mean? So I've always been kind of aboard the AI train, not on board the AI hype train. I do think a lot of it is overstated. I've been pretty transparent about my opinions on things like Copilot for security. But I do think, in general, I'm finding it very useful.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And even within YouTube, there are nice little things that I use as well. Like for my shorts, I do a lot of shorts just to add a little bit more value to my subscribers and members. And I record them and then I feed them into a little tool called Opus Clip, which is what puts all the nice little writing on it, which is a nice little touch, the little subtitles in green and white, and things like TubeBuddy, which I subscribe to, which gives me title generating ideas and suggested tags and so much good stuff, keywords. So it really is time saving and helps me to grow this channel even more. But you just mentioned something though that I want to talk about, and that's Copilot for security, because I sense you might be on the same wavelength as me on that. And that as a Microsoft partner, that we both work for Microsoft partners, we have really struggled to see the value in it for us. I think it's very much aimed at the end customer rather than any value that, because let's face it, there's not an awful lot of value in showing them how to use it. Where do you stand on the whole thing as it is right now?
Geez, I have to be careful here. So, look, I think long term I'm optimistic, but at the minute there's an awful lot of challenges that I got with Copilot for security, and I've written blogs and a whole bunch of stuff on this. I did a video for Kevin and Zoe's month of Copilots thing where I really do a deep dive into Copilot for security and explain the use cases, the strengths and the weaknesses and all that kind of stuff. And I think the big one for me at the minute is just the sheer cost of the thing, insofar as it is, if you follow Microsoft's recommended licensing structure, they do it based on these things called SCUs, which are kind of like compute units. You're if you go with their recommendations, you're looking at you're going into the 6 digits realm, right, in terms of annual costs. And I don't think the value is there, because for the same amount of money, there's just so many other alternative things you could do, right? You could spend that money on professional services and get guys like you or me in there to help improve the tools you're already not using. Rather than buying a new tool, improve your existing tools. So there's that. There's also all sorts of just general security hardening software you could go out there and buy that would probably cost you less or equal to, that I think would give you more of a return. That said, where its strengths do lie are for the maybe less the work that you and I do, which is all about preventative security, and maybe for folks that are further right in that kind of cybersecurity reference framework of incident response and threat triage and that kind of thing, right? So if you're in a SOC and you're looking at alerts all day and trying to figure out which ones are the most important, that's where its use cases tend to shine. And it does quite a good job of automatically summarizing a lot of stuff in the Defender portal. But again, I go back to the problem of the cost. It's just so expensive that I don't think it's worth it at the minute. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline and a lot of community-based stuff that will, I think, improve it. But yeah, I just struggle to justify it at the minute. I would love to see it go down the route of a kind of on-demand model where I can just pay for it on demand and use it when I need it. Agreed. And you can kind of do that at the minute, but it's not available like that out the box. You've got to get scripts and community tools and all that kind of stuff to do it, and there's no guarantee of availability. So yeah, that would be my preference for where it heads in the future. And I don't know if that is the way it's going to head, but I'd be kind of surprised if it didn't head that way.
Definitely, yeah. I agree with you. I think the maturity of it is not quite there yet, but I think it'll get there, though. I really do. I think they'll get it right with time, but I just don't think it's where it needs to be just now. And on the point you made about it summarizing, you might have a different experience to me here, but when I looked through some of the workbooks and scenarios you can get on demos.microsoft.com as Microsoft partners, there's some good sort of walkthroughs of it, and it shows you a couple of examples where instead of sort of you going through these alerts and interpreting them manually themselves, it opens up the side panel in Defender and summarizes it for you. And I thought to myself, this is crikey, this is quite a long summary. This is actually feels longer than actually looking at the alert itself.
That's a really good point, insofar as, if the summary is structured like some kind of essay that I need to read, rather than just bullet this, bullet that, here's what you really need to know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's counterproductive, right? Yeah. And there is, I have to be honest, one of the things that does come to mind is, why do I have to pay extra for this? I'm paying a ton of money for my Defender for Endpoint or my E5 license. Yeah. Can't you guys just include this as part of that? Because it's not that groundbreaking, you know what I mean? But that's licensing, and the economics of all that kind of stuff is not my strong point. So I will defer to the folks whose it is. But look, that's a question that does come up a lot, is why am I paying extra for all this stuff now when I thought if I got E5, I'd just get the full shebang?
Yeah, likewise. It'll run and run, no doubt, and we'll see where we get to with it. As a fellow wrestling fan, I would be very, very remiss if I didn't call out one thing, that whenever I hear SCU, I immediately think of Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian in AEW. SCU.
Yep. There's that, and I'll tell you what, it also occurred to me what that is Stone Cold University. I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, back in the Attitude Era, there was a Stone Cold University t-shirt. And I remember seeing it for the first time, and I was like, wait a second, I know this. What do I know this from? Oh, yeah, it's a WWF thing. Oh, well.
Absolutely wonderful. But we might talk a little bit more about wrestling before we wind up, because it's a massive passion for both of us. But getting back to the book just briefly, if I may, the Microsoft Defender XDR, just maybe as if you wouldn't mind sharing with the folks what comprises XDR, because it's made up of a number of Defender products, right?
Yeah, spot on. So Defender XDR is really made up of 5 core distinguishable products. That's going to be Defender for Endpoint, Defender Vulnerability Management, and they're very similar, but you can license them separately. Defender for Office 365, which is, your email security and your Teams/SharePoint security. Defender for Identity, which is all about on-premises Active Directory and some other things, but that's the simple version. And then Defender for Cloud Apps, which is, it's a lot of stuff now, but it's all about cloud apps. So SaaS, IaaS, and then also discovering shadow IT use in your organization. So those are kind of the 5 core pillars of it. But really, where it gets very useful is it can pull signals from other sources as well. So Entra ID and Entra ID protection, data loss prevention, Defender for IoT, all these different types of services, they also integrate with the Defender XDR stack and the platform. And actually, as of earlier this year, so does Sentinel. So we can get this kind of unified response where we've got our core XDR, and they go really deep and they play very nicely with each other and tell that full attack story. But then we've got all these other signals that are, I don't want to say second-class citizens, but they're the ones that aren't part of that core platform, but they still integrate with it very nicely. So purely as an example, working with a customer recently where they had something we're seeing a lot of, which is they had an adversary in the middle attack. So MFA compromised through a reverse proxy. And that is protected by a few things, but one of the ways that it can respond to it is Entra ID protection. Now, Entra ID protection, conventionally, it's not a Defender thing, it's an Entra thing, right? But through Defender XDR, rather than me having to go to the Entra portal, I just go to my security portal, and it tells me about the adversary in the middle attack there. It tells me the user, the device, all that kind of stuff. And it can join all these assets together so that I don't have to jump from portal to portal to portal. And it can also respond very, very quickly. So one of the ways it does that is attack disruption, where it can kind of hit the pause button if it looks like there's an attack in progress. So as an example, we could disable a user's on-prem Active Directory account or disable their Entra ID account. And that might not reverse some of the damage that's been done by the adversary, but it can stop them, right? And stop them proceeding any further. So that's the kind of that's the 500-mile look down at what Defender XDR is.
Oh, fantastic. And hang on a minute. Let me just grab it, because I actually have first edition of your book right here. So there it is, and co-authored by another Microsoft MVP and very good friend, Victor Hedberg. So if you haven't already, well, when's the second edition? It'll be a while if you haven't started it yet, I'm guessing. So it'll be a good few months of adding to this already quite chunky title. But this is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful book, and I can't recommend it enough. So do go and check it out if you haven't already.
No, appreciate that. It's you're right. We're at the very embryonic stages of the second edition, so we're just kind of putting together structure and all that kind of stuff before we hit the ground running writing it. But we will have kind of new content and new chapters. So, for example, we'll have parts in there about the new integration of Sentinel. We'll have parts in there about kind of the exposure posture management, which is kind of an evolution of Defender vulnerability management. And we're also going to try and focus a lot more on the operational aspect of Defender for Endpoint. This kind of goes to what I was talking about earlier, is certainly historically deploying Defender for Endpoint was a real challenge. There was so many little nuances and variations depending on the OS and what your network was like and a whole bunch of other stuff in your management engine. As that has simplified, the need for us to spend a lot of time and pages on how to deploy it, well, we might be able to simplify that. And if we can reduce the number of time we tell you how to deploy it, we can increase the amount of time spent telling you, well, how can I actually use this? So what are some of the cool tips and techniques, day-to-day operations, that kind of thing. So that's one of the kind of objectives as a second edition is, if you deployed it using the first edition, well, maybe the second edition can get you up to speed with some new and revised best practices for actually using it day-to-day.
Oh, brilliant! I will look forward to that when it lands. I don't envy you the task as somebody who's written a few books myself and is taking a very, very, very extended break from writing. I may never go back to it, to be honest. I think I've had enough for a good long while. It's a tough process. It's very time consuming, and when you get to the back and forth with various editors, because I wrote for the same company as you, Pact, and it's like content, grammar review and consistency review. Then there's the technical review, and then so many reviews. And by the time you get through it all, you feel like, God, Microsoft have changed something. Got to go back and change it. When will this book ever come out? It's like,
yeah, no, it's a good point, and the reality is, and it's been brought up to me a few times, is people question the point, like, well, what's the point in you writing or me buying a book when, by your own admission, this stuff changes every day, every month, every week, right? And it's like, look, I get that, but whether it's Defender or Purview or Entra or Intune or on-prem AD, sure, it's going to change, but a lot of the underlying principles, they're going to remain the same. And if you can build that fundamental knowledge, that's going to put you in a good place to deal with the, that week, every time that week you get the kind of the weekly change report from Microsoft in the admin center. So I think that's part of it. And to your point about the challenges of writing a book just in general, I totally agree. I'll be honest, I hate it. Like, I really hate the writing process, but I think it's worth it. I like the feeling after I've done it. I love helping out folks with that kind of contribution to the community. So it's like, look, I'm just going to suffer through it and do it. And that's the bottom line.
Totally agree. There's no better feeling when you get to an end of a chapter and go, oh, right, submit, off it goes. And it's just such a good feeling. And that end product, once it's out and you get that physical copy in your hand, it's such a great feeling. So absolutely agree with that. Okay. One thing I do want to ask you is, over the past few years, in relation to things like that ever referenced Gartner Magic Quadrant and Forrester reports and all that sort of thing, how far of a journey do you think Microsoft have come in the past, say, 5 years in being taken more seriously as a security company compared to some of those more traditional big names?
That's a great question. I guess we're hot off the heels of a certain other vendor having a big news event. So I think in terms of the market, they're going to look quite favorably at Microsoft Defender, certainly in the short term, relative to that other one. But if I think about it more broadly, there are a number of challenges that Microsoft clearly face, and they'll face them by their own admission. Number one that comes to mind is purely reputationally. They've got a lot to overcome from the historic reality of Microsoft and security, right? I mean, we're in 2024 now, but folks still think that we're sitting. When you mention Defender, folks still think that we're talking about, Defender that would have existed back in the early 2000s, right? So it's that doesn't. I don't think that's fair. When we talk about it in the enterprise space, look, there's a few things going on there. Number one, operationally, you have to look at Microsoft as an organization as more like. Microsoft, to me, is not just one company. Microsoft is like 10,000 companies that all have a reasonably shared vision, but pulling that together and creating cohesion is really difficult. And I think what you see with the Microsoft security organization and the security stack is that they actually do a really good job of that. And to me, when we're talking about, well, how does it compare to maybe those long-term established vendors out there, right? So your Semantics, your Trellixes, I guess CrowdStrike to some extent, all these other vendors that are maybe out there. In an identity, you get guys like Okta and the rest of it, and in CNAPP you get Wiz and all these other ones that are either there for a while or they're rising up. The one thing that these folks don't have that undeniably is where Microsoft shine is that full end-to-end platform play. And I'll tell you what, I was, before I did this podcast with you, I did my own podcast with Ryan John Murphy, who we both know as complete Purview expert. And we were talking about this, where it's like the advantage of the Microsoft stack. Think of I'm mostly thinking of Microsoft 365. When you get all those security tools, all those compliance tools, all those identity tools, management tools, communication tools, is the way they pull together to actually give you what to me is actually probably the most mature solution in the market. And what I mean by that is if I'm using Slack for my day-to-day comms, if I'm using G Suite for all my documents, and then I'm using this platform and the other platform and all that kind of stuff, if I have an incident, tying together the data and the audits and the logs from all of that stuff, sure, I can do seam and SOAR, but that adds overhead, it adds complexity, and it slows me down. With the 365 story, you kind of get, I won't say it's simple, but compared to the alternative, in my opinion, you get that security through the simplicity of it, right? And while it's not perfect, in a lot of cases, you can kind of take for granted that some stuff is just going to be available. So for example, if we take Purview and eDiscovery, well, I just kind of take for granted that, sure, I can do eDiscovery on it because it's sitting in 365 somewhere. Yeah. But if I'm not going all in on 365, well, I need to go and think, okay, it's away in some other SaaS platform. I got to pull it out, put it on a laptop, upload it into another piece of software and deal with it that way. Slows me down, adds overheads, and that's just assuming I can even do it in the first place, right? So again, if we're thinking about versus all the other competitors and other vendors out there, to me, that is a strategy that Microsoft has done since day one, and it is the winning strategy for most companies out there. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you'll struggle to find any client of any company that we've ever worked for, you and I, that doesn't have Microsoft there somewhere. So, really good point indeed. I do want to mention the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance User Group, which your good self and one of your ThreatScape colleagues, what's his name again? Was it William?
Yes, spot on. William Francelet.
William Francelet, yes. Honestly, it's my birthday on Sunday, and I think the older I get each year, my brain cells go a little bit. I'm forgetting names and places and all sorts. But William, yeah, and you have been running that and relaunched it for a few months now. How's that? I've not managed to get to one yet. I really must try and get to one. How's it all been going, and what have you got coming up on that?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, and shout out to William if he's watching this, or anyone that knows William. They know he is an absolute machine. The guy just more certifications than anyone I've ever met in the Microsoft world, and he knows everything about everything. So big shout out to William, and he's been fantastic at being a co-organizer of the user group with me. So for those of you that aren't aware, the 365 Security and Compliance User Group is a monthly meetup. We meet up usually the last Wednesday of every month for 2.5 hours. And we do a run through of all the Microsoft security news that month. So we spend about 15, 20 minutes going through that, just share everything that we've learned and that's going on in the world. And then we have usually 2 sessions every month that are all about Microsoft security, compliance, identity, and management. So, for example, we're just off the heels last month of having the guys that did the definitive guide to KQL book that just came out. So we had Matt and Mark. They did a Ask Us Anything about KQL, and that was fantastic. We learned a little bit about their kind of thoughts on Microsoft incident response and all the rest of it. And then coming up, we're recording this in July. So coming up in July, we've got more sessions. So we've got a session on how to leverage PowerShell as a defender in a blue team. And I think, I'm looking at the calendar here, I think we've got monthly user groups now lined up and going into October now. So we're doing a pretty good job of organizing these. We get a couple speakers every month, and the community that we're building is really good. We've got a lot of recurring folks attending every month, and it's a great opportunity for folks to learn stuff and upskill and increase your value to your employer and your value to potential other employers if you're kind of looking at growing your career. And also we're sponsored now, so Pact sponsor us. They give away 1 physical book and 5 ebooks every month, so you can win some stuff just by showing up. And we're also sponsored by eNow Software. So eNow Software do some really cool stuff on Microsoft 365 management. They got a really cool tool called App Governance, which is all about OAuth security. And they also do a giveaway of $150 or whatever your local currency is every month as well. So you can learn some stuff and then also win some prizes. So I'll see you there.
you absolutely will. I will get to one, and I will put all of the links to everything we've talked about in the description. So the book and the user group and the LinkedIn course. But let's start winding things up with a bit of fun stuff. Let's talk a little bit about wrestling and because we both love it, and I'm quite excited because literally before I came on this video to record with you this morning, I saw an Instagram post from Triple H, Paul Levesque. He's in London today, meeting with Sadiq Khan, the mayor, to talk about bringing WrestleMania to the UK. And apparently, talks went well. So I think I'd like to, if that's happening, I'm going to be there.
Yeah, that would be kind of cool. It's a, well, you know this, but it's a dirty business, and I have to be honest, it does kind of creep me out when I see all the, I don't want to see taxpayers' money going towards stuff like this, but I get it. That's the game, and big events, you know, they get tax subsidies and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you know, it's funny you mention it because I can't remember. I was filling out a form recently for something. I think it was Scottish Summit or something, and it basically said, "What are your interests outside of IT?" And I was like, "Okay, loud cars, death metal, and pro wrestling." And I'm like, basically like a 14-year-old child, you know what I mean, with my interests. But yeah, it's fun. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna lie, I do love it. I get hyped up about it. I do still live in probably the late 90s or early 2000s in terms of, you know, I'm still big Stone Cold guy rather than any of the new folks. But yeah, that's just me. I'm set in my ways.
Oh, I totally agree. That attitude era for me will never be better. Those sort of like late 90s and up to 2002 maybe was that really brilliant perfection. And in WCW with the NWO, the first iteration of it anyway. But I have to say though, in the last sort of 4 years, I think we're in a bit of a renaissance time in wrestling. Its popularity is massive again, and things like Roman Reigns having a 4-year almost title reign and the story that went alongside that, and The Rock coming back to be part owner, and Cody Rhodes building this massive fan base and unexpectedly turning The Rock heel as part of the process. I've just been massively entertained by it. It's been fantastic. I've enjoyed it more than I have in years.
Yeah, it's very cool seeing The Rock back. The Rock is just that level of charisma and just natural ability to make you interested in what he's doing. He's kind of unparalleled in that regard. But yeah, you're right. There has been a lot of buzz about it recently. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine it ever reaching the level of popularity that it did back in both the late 90s and then I guess the 80s as well. We had Hulkamania and all that kind of nonsense going on. But yeah, you know, it's cool to see there's a kind of new generation getting into it.
Yeah, definitely. Must have a chat with that fellow we talked to a few years ago again. Now, Jimmy, I can't remember his second name, but he works at Microsoft.
Yes, you're right. Jimmy, I want to say, Jimmy V. I remember. But he worked at
WWE or F at the time, didn't he? And had loads of great stories to tell. And we were just sat there just listening and in awe.
Yep. Never been so jealous of someone in my professional career. It was what a gig to have. You know what I mean? You remember him telling a story how he, after an event, he went and had dinner, like a takeaway with Stone Cold and The Rock. And it's like, how does that, how does your life continue at that level of just pure amazement? But cool, good story.
Jimmy Vaughan, I think his name is. Jimmy. Hey, right. Jimmy, if you happen to be watching, it'd be nice to catch up sometime. But yeah, and the metal, the music, something you and I also have in common. We have very similar musical tastes and Motorhead, that sort of thing. But yeah, so if you're a 14-year-old lad, I am also a 52-year-old almost now. Masquerading as a 14-year-old, so and long may it continue. But Rue, is there anything else you want to share before we wind things up?
Nope. I'm all good. I think I promoted more than enough of myself. So again, I just thank you for the invitation and keep doing what you're doing with all your YouTube stuff. It's very cool.
Oh, thank you, my friend. It's massively appreciated, and you keep doing what you're doing too. It's lovely to see you, lovely to talk to you. Let's try and talk more. Busy lives that we all have these days, and more responsible jobs than we've both got these days than we had when we first met each other. But keep doing what you do. Much love to the family and your cats and your precious cars, and and just keep on enjoying life and keep on being you, my friend, because you're an absolute star. I love you to bits, and I shall wind things up there. So yeah, let's wind up this video. Let's just ask everyone to give this video a great big thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, and how could you not with such a great guest? Do hit the subscribe button. That helps me so much to grow the channel. I'm on 9,100 and something followers now, and I'm just really, really excited about reaching 10K. That's been a milestone that's been in my sights for a while now. So please help me to do that. If you want to become a member, I've got a really growing members community. It blows my mind that so many people join and actually contribute in that way. So thank you so much. Okay, well, you all take care, travel well, stay safe, and I'll see you very, very soon. And thanks again, Ruth. Take care all. Bye-bye.